927, you are listening to the Keith Hansen Show on 99.7 FM, WNTK, 98.9 FM, and 1490 AM, WUVR. All right, now we're going to have a conversation with somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. She's a gun law expert. She's a member of U.S. Law Shield, one of the country's leading voices on the Second Amendment, an independent program attorney as well, too. So she's actually got some experience here, also as a former prosecutor. Emily Taylor, thank you so much for joining me on the program this morning. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. How are you?
I got to be honest with you, Emily. I'm a little bit frustrated, and my patience and my tolerance is really being pushed to the limit here. With everybody's an expert. Everybody is, I watch CSI, so I know how forensics get handled at a crime scene. Everybody is an expert. Everybody knows everything about everything. And then you got the other pool of morons. You get these people that are talking about conspiracy theories. And this insanity's got to stop. And the problem is social media is only giving these people a forum.
Absolutely. I turned off the news myself last night out of disgust. And there's this attitude amongst most of the media right now, particularly as information is coming to light about bump stocks, which have been around, been lawful. The ATF has evaluated bump stocks, have said this is not an NFA item. Go on, but, enjoy it if you like. And the prevailing thought here seems to be by the media, well, why is this legal? This is creating illegal weapons. And, it just makes me shake my head and sort of say, why is it legal? I mean, I thought this was America. I thought that things are legal here, regardless of whether or not they conform to your personal belief of what should be available. When the federal government, which, the ATF for the last 8 years was not particularly a friendly body to us pro-Second Amendment folks, when that ATF says, sure, this is a lawful item, well, it's a lawful item.
Emily, let's first. I just want to, for the benefit of people, because there may be a lot of people listening that may not really understand what a bump stock is. So let's try to explain what a bump stock is, how it functions, what is it designed to do, and why is it becoming the focal point as of right now, at least on this on the investigation, at least from the hardware standpoint of the investigation.
Sure thing. Well, a bump stock is nothing but a firearms accessory. It's a piece of plastic. You attach it to your semi-automatic rifle, and what it does is it uses the recoil of the firearm itself in order to create a rhythmic trigger pull. So what you're doing is you're actually bouncing the gun in a way that you have your finger in place, but you are pulling the trigger quickly and rhythmically by the motion of the gun's own recoil. It does sound quite a bit like a fully automatic weapon, but it's not, because you are still pulling the trigger once. One round is dispelled in that firearm, and again, you pull the trigger again, one round comes out. So it is not, in contradiction to all of the things on NBC and CNN right now. You're not converting a semi-automatic rifle to a fully automatic rifle. You still have a semi-automatic rifle, one pull of the trigger, one round fired from the gun.
Now, one of the things too, and when the video, the video from really ground zero of this, where the audio was being played, you could hear it, and when I heard that, I was able to pick up on a couple of different interruptions where it's like, all right, this is not fully automatic. And I had said very early on, I said the next morning, that this, I didn't suspect that this was an automatic weapon, that I suspected that, it may have been something that was illegally modified, but I said it's most likely going to be a bump stock because, again, it's the path of least resistance. Not to mention that fully automatic weapons, pursuant to the National Firearms Act, they are legal to own, they are legal to possess, they are legal to purchase, albeit heavily, heavily regulated. There's an extensive application packet that has to be filled out, that has to be sent into the ATF. That weapon system, at that point, once the tax stamp is granted, that weapon is registered with the ATF. There is a very clear paper trail. There are very, very strict federal regulations on who can come in contact with that, who I could transfer that to, who I could give that to. They are very heavily regulated, and not to mention that Class 3 fully automatic firearms became illegal. Not I want to say illegal, but any firearms that were manufactured after 1986 were being manufactured only for distribution to law enforcement agencies and government agencies, the military. That all of the Class 3 fully automatic weapons that exist in civilian hands today, pursuant to the NFA, are all manufactured in or prior to 1986. As a result of that, there is a very limited pool with no new firearms being added to that pool, which means that the ones that are on the market right now, you can't touch a fully automatic Class 3 NFA-regulated automatic machine gun, if you want to call it that, for really under $15,000 to $20,000. They are cost prohibitive. People are not going to go out and spend $20,000 to buy a gun and then go out and use that in a mass murder.
You know, this is one of my soapboxes, and I am so glad you're standing on that box with me because, yes, there are two hurdles to possessing these weapons. That's why they're not used by people who are wanting to do harm to human life, because you have to go through the application process, which you've described beautifully. It requires fingerprints, background check, notifying your chief law enforcement officer of your county. It requires waiting upwards of a year. People can get, if you know people who have applied to have NFA items, the ATF will give you a tax stamp for a suppressor sometimes in 6 to 9 months. But if you're looking at a transfer of a fully automatic firearm, you are most likely waiting more than a year. And that's if, this is the second hurdle that you mentioned, you can find someone who is willing to sell you, to transfer to you their fully automatic weapon. They're in short supply and are incredibly expensive. It is one of the most heavily regulated firearms that we have in the whole country. And I roll my eyes every time the media says fully automatic. And, I rolled my eyes this time too and said, I'm not sure you really know what you're talking about. Although I will say, to my ear, it was difficult to distinguish. You are far more experienced tactically than I am, but I did have a difficult time distinguishing from that audio the bump stock versus a fully automatic staccato.
Normally, when you're listening to a fully automatic, it's actually a lot faster, and that's one of the reasons why immediately I didn't suspect that it was an illegally altered, like a filed sear, or something like that. And of course, with the types of trainings and the types of programs that I'm routinely conducting, we're either doing law enforcement platforms that are either set to tri-burst, or to full auto. And so you start to pick up on the little subtleties that, it's one of those, it's kind of difficult to explain, but when you're listening to it and you're listening to it on a regular basis, again, there's a very distinctive rhythmic pattern that you start to be able to pick up. That being said, you also tend to look at that where people who are doing these things, I'm a firm believer in that criminals are lazy, whether it's a person who decides to mug somebody for pocket cash and drug money, or if it's somebody who goes off on a mass killing spree like this. By and large, they tend to follow the path of least resistance. So, again, it's not going to be a legitimate Class 3 weapon, and probably it's not going to be an illegally modified weapon. The path of least resistance is to go to a sporting goods store, pick up a bump stock for $249, slap it on the rifle, and it's close enough.
Absolutely. And, I agree wholeheartedly. We saw that, as prosecuting attorneys all the time, that people who are engaging in these activities are, they're lazy. You're absolutely right. And, there are these people who are saying, well, he could have illegally modified. It's just such a bizarre statement. And there are, these rumors going around, well, it's so easy to modify. Well, no, it's not. To get your hands on a fully automatic sear, first of all, that is the machine gun itself, right? That is the part. If you have nothing but a fully automatic sear in your possession, you are committing a federal felony and probably, depending on the state that you live in, a state-level felony as well. And of course, they're incredibly. That is the machine gun. They are just as difficult to get. And you know, the idea that he would have been unlawfully modifying the sear in order to create a fully automatic weapon is just, it really is. It's crazy. And
you know, you hit on a key point there, which you and I have both said this repeatedly, that it's illegally modified. So it's, you know, there again, we're talking about some illegal action to take a device that is legal. You're breaking the law, and you are committing an illegal act to take that device and modify it in such a way that it's being operated or functioning contrary to its intent of design and manufacture.
Yes, and that's, you know, another thing that comes up, but that most of the media doesn't want to talk about when they start urging tougher laws, more gun control in the wake of one of these tragedies is these people, if you're willing to commit murder, are you really not willing to break a regulatory rule about owning and possessing firearms? How does that make sense in anyone's mind?
Well, you know, we had a situation up here. We're in the Dartmouth, Hitchcock, Upper Valley region of New Hampshire. I mean, we had a situation that occurred 3 weeks ago where, I mean, it was originally called out as an active shooter situation. It turned out to be a single domestic violence homicide. Man drives up from Rhode Island, drives up to central New Hampshire, goes into Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, which is a gun-free zone, by the way. Checks in with security, goes up to the 4th floor intensive care unit, pulls out a handgun, and executes his mother as she's laying in the intensive care unit. Well, it's a gun-free zone. So, I mean, how is this possible? That is impossible. It's got to be a conspiracy theory that shooting took place because the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center is a gun-free zone. Again, it's proof positive that when criminals want to do something, they're going to do it irrespective of whatever laws happen to be on the books that are designed to control the actions of these individuals. This doesn't make sense. And I've said this before. Gun control is the low-hanging fruit for the intellectually impotent. It's the easy go-to thing when you don't have the information, the education, or the critical thinking skills to be able to have a reasonable discussion about what needs to be done. And what shuts them down every time, Emily, is when I say, you want enhanced background checks? Great. Then you lobby to repeal HIPAA so that way the mental health records of these people who, by the way, in the past 30 years for the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security, FBI, they've been compiling the statistics of all the active shooters for the past 30 years. 95% of these people have extensive histories of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications. They are on brain chemistry altering drugs for the better portion of their life. But we don't want to talk about mental health. We don't want to talk about accessibility of those records to create a full picture of a person's suitability to possess a firearm or a concealed weapons permit. We just got to go ahead and we got to ban the device because the device is the problem, not the broken people and the mindset in our society today.
Right. And this is the only time they don't want to talk about expanding health care and expanding, you know, making things easier for people to, you know, that's what rolls off their tongue every other moment. But when you suggest, well, perhaps we need to take a better look at the mental health of these shooters, provide, you know, some access to care, maybe that would stop these incidences. No longer is that the problem. The problem is the gun itself. I live and I practice law in Harris County, Texas. That's the Houston area. Harris County has the highest incidence of drunk driving deaths in the entire state of Texas, and it's up there in the whole country. Now, does that mean that it's the car's fault? Does that mean that we take everyone's driver's licenses away or that we impose curfews so that people can't drive between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. so that we prevent drunk driving deaths? You know, of course not, because that would be invading the rights of people who have done nothing wrong in order to, of course, saving lives is a laudable goal, but there are stops and there are limitations. And as ridiculous as the suggestion would sound to take everyone's driver's license away because it would prevent drunk driving deaths, driving isn't a constitutional right. It should sound even more ridiculous to people when we talk about limiting gun access to prevent things like this. It is not how our country works. It's not how our Constitution works.
So let's for the sake of argument, let's apply the liberal progressive mindset to this argument. Okay, well, Emily, I understand that. And we don't want to ban, driver's licenses outright. So let's implement some common sense motor vehicle reform laws. Let's put governors on cars so that way those cars cannot travel above, they are physically restricted and unable to travel above 55 miles an hour. And, really, nobody needs a car that's got 600 horsepower in it. So we need to pass a law where only cars that have a 350 or less horsepower engine are permitted to be sold to the general public without special licensing or anything else like that. And, nobody needs to have a 25-gallon gasoline tank. Well, so really what we need to do is restrict that down to 10 gallons. That's common sense motor vehicle law reform. And you'd roll your eyes and go, that is the most dumb, insane, ludicrous, stupid thing I've ever heard. Right. But we have absolutely no problem when we have politicians who do that, like Senator McCarthy, who doesn't even know what a shoulder stock is. Oh, it's a shoulder thingy that goes up. You don't even know what it is you want to ban, but you want to ban it because you don't know what it is, and it's scary.
Exactly. Again, wholeheartedly, the hypocrisy is just staggering. And I wish that some of these politicians who spout off as though they knew the first thing about firearms would turn to their own ATF and look at what they do. The ATF, for, all of the problems that I have with some of the actions that they were taking under, over the last 8 years, the ATF is trained. They are there, and they are quite meticulous at interpreting the statute word for word, everything that needs to happen, particularly as it pertains to highly regulated weapons like NFA weapons, and giving their opinion. Go look at what the ATF has said about some of these things. I think a great example recently is a Mossberg 590 Shockwave. Right? Mm-hmm. It has a 14-inch barrel. The ATF had to look into it and say, is this a short barrel shotgun? Do we need to regulate this under the ATF? Under the NFA? And they really, analyzed, picked it apart, decided, no, it's got a pistol grip. It is not a shotgun. Issued an opinion, and that was that. Why these politicians think that they know better than literally everyone else, than the ATF, which issued, an opinion and said this bump stock is not, does not create an NFA item. It baffles me.
Emily Taylor joins me on the WNTK Newsline. She's an independent program attorney with U.S. Law Shield, one of the country's leading voices on the Second Amendment.